Welcome to chapter 1 of our adventure through Hebrew. This corresponds to chapter 1 in our Learning Biblical Hebrew textbook, starting on page 1 of the grammar, the chapter titled The Hebrew Alphabet. I'm calling this lesson chapter 1.1 because I have another lesson video that will come after this one that will explain some details about the alphabet. But this first video is to introduce you to all the letters Aleph through Tav. If you have opened your textbook, your Kutz-Josberger textbook, Learning Biblical Hebrew, to page 1, you can follow along with me, and I'll refer to a few things in the actual textbook as we go. So, starting off, first things first, there's a little bit about a history of what we're learning, Hebrew, and there's a term here that's used in the first paragraph of the textbook that is Paleo-Hebrew. And then there's a, to me at least, confusing looking chart at the bottom of page 1. Not an auspicious beginning for the textbook, but nonetheless, it gets better, trust me. There's a couple really important pieces of information here. The first is that Hebrew moves right to left. And the second thing they're showing you is there's two different alphabets here. The one on top looks a little bit more like what you might be used to if you have seen Hebrew written before. And then underneath there looks like a kind of strange looking script with lots of straight angles and lines and even some circles and things. That is what's called Paleo-Hebrew, an ancient form of writing that was actually a Canaanite form of writing that existed before Aramaic. So that is to say, what we're learning when we learn the Hebrew alphabet is a particular bunch of shapes, like little pictures, right, that represent sounds. And those little pictures that we're going to learn in our class today are the kinds of, they're the alphabet, the little pictures of letters that you will find if you open up a Hebrew Bible. That is a very specific alphabet that was invented after Hebrew had started to be written down. So there's a more ancient version of Hebrew. So if you go to Israel or you go to a museum somewhere in the United States or somewhere else around the world and you see ancient Hebrew from the biblical era written down, it will probably be written in what's called Paleo-Hebrew, this ancient script. We're not going to learn that. We're just learning the Aramaic square script. So if you turn the page, and on page 2 and 3 of the Josberger Kutz textbook, you will see this is the alphabet that you're going to learn. So table 1.1, the Hebrew alphabet, on page 2, that's what you're going to learn, and that's what I'm going to teach you here today. So don't worry about the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, but it's just a cool historical thing that those started out as pictographs, pictures of things. But we're going to start here, you and me, that is. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just to remind you of what we're going to be studying today. We're going to come back to that verse again and again throughout the first few weeks, and it's going to be helpful. So, continue to sing along with me and sing it to yourself. So, here's what we need to know about the Hebrew alphabet, or Aleph Base. So, alphabet, our name for this list of little pictures that correspond to sounds, right? The name alphabet actually comes from alpha and beta, the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, which means in Hebrew they have different names for the letters. Instead of alpha, they have aleph as their first letter, and instead of beta, it's bait. So if we want to talk about the Hebrew alphabet, we might want to call it the Hebrew Aleph Bait. So what to know about the Hebrew Aleph Bait? We need to know a few things about each letter and then a pattern of all of those letters together. So here's what you need to know. You need to know the name of each letter. Each letter has a name, just like in English. And this isn't always the sound the letter makes, like W in English. W, that's not a sound, right? W. So in any event, it makes a sound W, which is not actually in the name W, right? So all to say that each letter has a name. Then there's a sound that goes along with each letter. So in English, W makes a W sound. And then there's a transliteration. That is, if you're going to try to write Hebrew in characters that correspond to the English language, like Latin characters that are used for French and Spanish and so on. If you want to write in that kind of style, what would you use to represent this ancient script? So that's often corresponds to the sound a bit in what it would be in English. So there's the name, the sound, the transliteration, and then the form of each letter. That is the shape. What's the little picture that you make in the Aramaic square script to be able to represent this sound? And then lastly, the order of the letters, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. How do they go, right? What's the pattern that they're in? All of these things are necessary. So 4 of those things correspond to kind of each letter. Each letter has 4 of these things to learn. And then the 5th one, the order, is when you string them all together. So the Hebrew alphabet is fascinating to me, in part because it consists of only 22 letters. So if you think about in English, we have 26 letters. But in Hebrew, you have 22 letters only. And so they have less letters. And actually, they have different sounds than we have represented in English. So that is to say, every language sounds differently. And so the alphabet is supposed to write the sounds that occur in that language. So we have to learn some languages some sounds, that you're not familiar with. It doesn't matter what your first language is. Some sounds in here are going to be strange to you. So there's 22 sounds that form the backdrop of Semitic languages. That's what this alphabet represents. And they are all consonants. A consonant is like a hard sound, like a p, b, m, k. That means we don't have any of what's called vowels in the Hebrew alphabet. A vowel is an air sound. Ah, e, I, o, oo. Sounds that you make where you don't close your mouth in any way, or your lips, or your teeth, or your tongue. I. Those are vowels. Vowels aren't written down in Hebrew. At least in ancient Hebrew, they weren't written down. There was a system invented to represent vowels, the little dots and lines above and below the letters. We're going to get to that later. But first, we're just going to learn the alphabet. That is, the consonant sounds. One thing to say about transliteration is that you're trying to represent a Hebrew letter using an English letter that most closely approximates its sound. There are a couple of letters that don't have English equivalents, so we have to use things other than letters to represent them. So we'll have a couple of symbols that we use, and we'll start off with one of those, in fact. So just to go with transliteration, really important thing about Hebrew is that it moves right to left. What you're looking at there is the Hebrew word shalom. Shalom, which means peace, wholeness, fulfillment, fruitfulness. Even it means hello or greetings. Peace be upon you, right? So that's shalom in Hebrew. That little thing that looks kind of like a W in English, it's not a W. That's the beginning of the word. The word runs right to left. Shalom. Now, if you're going to try to transliterate, that is, write this word in English-looking characters, you would actually use a left-to-right pattern because English goes left to right. So when we read something in Hebrew, and that's in Hebrew characters, in Hebrew letters, we're going to move from right to left. This is going to be true for the Bible. It's going to be true even for your workbook, which is set up so that you have to read right to left. It's printed the other way around. You might have a hard time getting into your workbook, and it might not make sense to you right away because you got to open it the other way around. That's true of your Hebrew Bible too, the printed Hebrew Bible. It'll be opening what would be to an English speaker the wrong way, but that's because the language is written right to left. When we transliterate, when we write these Hebrew letters in English characters and try to represent the sounds, we write from left to right, just like we would normally in English. I hope that makes sense. So, let's start the alphabet, or the aleph-bet. The first Hebrew letter in the alphabet, or the aleph-bet, has a name, Aleph. Aleph. That's the name of the letter, Aleph, which actually means ox. And if you look at it, it looks like a little picture of an ox, right? That's because it actually started out as a picture of an ox head. Ancient languages, the ancient alphabet started pictographically, that is, as little pictures. So here's a little picture of an ox. It's called ox. Aleph is the letter, the sound that this letter makes is the first sound in the word Aleph. It sounds like A, right? Aleph, that's the first sound of A. But remember that there's only consonants in the Hebrew alphabet. This is a consonant sound. It's not the vowel. A is not the letter, not the sound that we're representing when we say Aleph. Instead, it's the sound before you say the A. Now, you might be thinking, there is no sound before the A. Well, in fact, there is. It's a sound of a stoppage of air. It's like catching your breath. If you've ever heard someone who's from Hawaii say the name Hawaii, you'll notice that there's a little gap in the middle of the name between the two I's. People whose native language is English and who have never been to Hawaii, they'll say Hawaii and just kind of put the two I's together. But someone who's been there might know that people say Hawaii because there's a stop in the middle of that word. That's the sound that your throat makes when it constricts. It actually stops breath. That's called a stop. That's the kind of letter that is a stop. Now this is the sound that's represented with aleph. So try to say the word apple. Apple. Now before you say the A sound, apple, feel what your throat is doing. Can you feel that constriction? So start to say apple, but then stop before you actually make any sounds. Do you feel your throat like kind of grabbing itself, right? That is the sound aleph. And now if you say aleph, you might feel your throat doing that before you even start. Now, isn't this kind of amazing? Ancient people recognized that is a sound. So it's the sound, it's a stoppage that occurs sometimes in the middle of words, sometimes at the beginning, and so on. In English, we have a silent H to represent this actually. So honest. Why is there an H at the beginning of honest? Shouldn't it be honest? No, it's not honest, it's honest because that's a silent H. What that H is representing is the stop. The same kind of stop that aleph tries to represent. So, or heir. I am an heir to the fortune, right? It's not hair. I'm not a heir to the fortune. So, all to say, this is represented if you want to transliterate this into English, you represent this with a little apostrophe. Now, that's not a letter in English, right? That's a punctuation mark. But that's okay. There's no official sound or image to picture a stop in English either, so we just use the apostrophe. So this is a strange way to begin, right? We're going to begin the Hebrew alphabet with something that can't be said in English. So sorry. This is one of the many times that we'll have to say sorry about people learning Hebrew, but also there's kind of an amazing aspect to it too. So how wondrous that we start with a stop. So in any event, aleph is our first letter. The name is aleph. It's represented by that image there that you see. And if you want to know how to draw this looks like a complicated picture, the letter for aleph, right? If you want to see it on page, this is in the Kunst-Josberger textbook, page 8, you will see a table 1.5 for writing the Hebrew square script. That's what we're learning right here. And you'll notice that the aleph that they've got there in the top right corner, because you started in the top right when you're reading and writing Hebrew, that they have aleph there. That is a little bit simpler way to write aleph, and you're welcome to write it that way. I've also posted kind of directions, like drawing directions. It has like 1, 2, 3, how to draw these pictures. That's on Moodle. It's underneath the PowerPoint and the video for this lesson. So you can find there a kind of instructions for how to draw these symbols. So in any event, table 1.5. Table 1.6, I should say, on page 9 of Kunst-Josberger, that is for writing in cursive. That's a modern Israeli way of writing. You don't have to do that. Don't learn that. Learn the Hebrew square script, because that's what you're going to read when you read biblical Hebrew. Table 1.6, read that if you're going to visit Israel. Or visit a community where lots of things will be written in modern Hebrew. So, in any event, our first letter is aleph. It is transliterated with an apostrophe into English. Its name is aleph, and it makes the sound. It's a stop. All right. We would actually even call it a glottal stop. Glottal meaning like your throat. It's a throat stop. A glottal stop. So, our next letter is bait. So, aleph bait is how we say the alphabet in Hebrew, right? The aleph bait. Well, we had aleph, and now we have bait. Here is bait. You can see the little picture for that letter. Again, you can see how to draw it on page 8, table 1.5 in Kunst-Josberger. You can see that it is pronounced, the name is bait. A bait is a way to say house. So it kind of looks like a little house, maybe a little shelter, maybe a tent, I don't know, a lean-to, something like that. But you can see that there's a curved line on top that kind of curves 90 degrees, and then there's kind of a foundation at the bottom. You can see a little dot in the middle of it too. You won't see that dot in Coots-Joesberger on page 8 or on the larger alphabet, page 2. That dot I'm going to explain in video 2. For now, go ahead and learn it by writing the dot in there for our class. You don't have to. You'll see on page 2 of Coots-Joesberger that the thing that says bait, that's without this little dot. So hold off on questions about the dot for just a minute, and we'll get to that. But it's pronounced B as in bat when it has that little dot in it, and it has the English transliteration B. So this is buh. This is our buh sound. So bait. Little picture of a house, transliterated with an English B, sounds like buh. All right. Our third letter is gimel. So aleph, bait, gimel. You can see that it's also one of the dot letters. I'll explain more about the dot letters in a minute. But you can see also that it's a thin letter. It's kind of a skinny letter. It's about half the width of aleph and bait. Now, all of these letters are made, at least in general, to fit into what's like a little box, like a little square. It's called the Aramaic square script because they're all kind of squarish letters. But you can see that there's a couple of letters that are narrow letters, and gimel is one of them. So it's this line that goes basically down, and then a little foot that comes out from it. The name is gimel, and it has a g sound. It's the g as in get, and it's transliterated with an English G. So in Hebrew, just like in Greek, you have your ABGs, not your ABCs. Aleph, Beit, Gimel. So let's say our ABGs. Okay, our next letter is Dalet, another dot letter. Again, we'll get to the dots later, but just to say that it's a D sound, and it's transliterated with the English D. So ABGD is the way that the Hebrew alphabet goes. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. Duh. B, G, D. Notice about the dalet when you draw it. Notice that there's a little bit comes out over the top right corner. It's like a right angle, right? It's like two lines, but notice that that line goes over the edge on the right side. The horizontal line goes over the vertical line a little bit. That's what we call a tittle. Yeah, you ever heard of Jesus talking about jots and tittles? A jot is an iota, a yod, a little letter we'll get to in just a little bit, which is hard to miss. It's kind of easy to miss, actually. You can miss it. But also these little tittles. These are these little bits of letters that kind of stick out over edges and stuff. That makes you be able to recognize this as a D, as a dalet. So notice that little bit hanging over the edge. Keep that angle right. And if you look at Coots and Joesberger, they have a little way of writing it on page 8 there, and you'll notice they have that little bit hanging over the edge. So a little bit hanging over the edge for the dalet. Next letter, so we have Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet now is Hey. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Hey! It's a H sound, pronounced like H is in hat, H. And the English transliteration is an H. That's nice, it makes sense. This looks a lot like a dalet. Notice, it's a dalet with like a little extra thing added to it. And one thing to think about is, it's kind of like a little space for breath to get out there. Notice that there's space between the horizontal line and the vertical line on the left. There's a space there, a gap there. When you write this letter, you gotta keep the gap there. Keep the gap for the breath to get out, the hey to get out. So an angular top right corner, a little bit kind of hanging off the edge here, but it's actually not necessary. The necessary thing to remember when making this letter is to make sure that there is a gap between the horizontal bar and the left down stroke. Don't finish off that wall, don't block up the air, don't block up your huh. There's your hey. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, hey. Next is Vav. Vav is actually the word for nail in Hebrew, and looks like a little nail there. You're gonna like nail that little nail in. It's a narrow letter like Gimel. Takes up about half the horizontal space of other letters, and just look like you kind of want to nail that little nail down. And that makes the sound Vav. But we're gonna transliterate it with the letter W. Now this is confusing because W sounds like wa, right? Now there's actually a debate here about exactly how people in the ancient world would have said this word. Many people think they would have said it wa. We in this class are going to say va because that's the tradition of basically linguistics that I come out of, and it comes out of a German school where people don't, W's in Germany are pronounced V, but the basic thing is we don't really know exactly how people would have pronounced this. So I'm going to call this letter Vav. You might hear some people speak about this letter and call it a wow. So you might hear wow, you might hear Vav, but I'm going to pronounce it Vav. I'm going to say Vav, and I'm going to have it pronounced as V, as in that, right? Va, va. We are going to translate it with W, though. Now, this is an important thing. It's actually, part of the name of God, Yahweh. This is where people get Jehovah from. It's kind of a misreading of Yahweh, and that va or wa sound. It's kind of, who knows what that sound like actually would have been right there in the middle. So in any event, Vav transliterated with a W. Our next letter is Zion, another skinny letter or thin letter, a letter that takes up about half the horizontal space of other Hebrew letters, so like Gimel and Vav. And this one's got a little beret on it. Notice you kind of make this little, it's like a Vav with a little hat on it, and it hangs off the right edge. It slopes from top left to bottom right. It slopes down. So notice that in your Kutz and Josberger. This is the letter Zion. It's transliterated with a Z, and it's pronounced like Z, like zebra. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion. Zion with the little beret. Notice that we can compare it to the Vav, also to the Gimel. It's a little bit like Gimel, but Gimel's got the foot. So Zion's got the beret on top, that little hat. Zion's got the hat. Vav has just got a little bend in it. You can also draw a Vav, like Kutz and Josberger say on page 8, just like a up and down line, like a nail. And then the Gimel's got a little foot. Our next letter, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, and then Chet. This is a tricky one. If you have never spoken a language where you had to make kind of a sound at the back of your throat, kind of like you're coughing a little bit or something, try to make that sound in the back of your throat. It's like if you're German and you're pronouncing the name of the famous composer Johann Bach, right? Johann Sebastian Bach. Or if you're trying to kind of cough up a fur ball or something, you might make that sound back there. But this is chet, chet. And when you say it, you're going to say Notice that this looks like Vav, except it's got the wall blocked up. It looks like Hey, the letter Hey. The letter Hey that we had a little gap there, where you let the air out from the gap. This letter, Chet, it's blocked up all the way. You fill in the wall. And you can kind of think of it that way because when you're saying, you're not letting any air out, right? You're kind of, you're constraining all of it. So we want to make this kind of an H, because it's kind of an H. It's the closest sound it makes to English. There's no English letter that corresponds to this, but if we're going to do that, we use what's called a diacritic. That is a mark that you're going to add to an English letter to make it clear that it's not the English letter, that it's representing something else, some other sound. So it's an H with a dot underneath it. That dot means it's intensive. It's a super intense H. So when you see this chet, you might first think it's a hey, but then you say, no, the wall's filled in. It's got to be super intense. It's a chet. So here's our little visual for it's not a hey, it's a chet. The hey has the wall open, a gap in the wall, so that the air can get out. All right, the next letter is tet. It's a t sound. Notice that this is a complicated one to try to replicate here. So you're not going to copy this image exactly when you draw a tet. Instead, look at page 8 of Kutz and Josberger, and you'll see that there's this kind of little spiral that you can make. Just make sure that the opening is on the top, and then the spiral starts kind of in the center and curls out to the right, and I'll recognize that as a tet. There's other ways to draw it too, but you can take a look at the sheet that I posted online. There's another way to draw it. Just like in English, there's lots of ways to kind of for your own personality to come through in your print, in your the way that you write your own script. But the point is to try to get it so we can recognize what it is. Now, this is represented in English transliteration with a T with a dot underneath it. This is because we haven't gotten to this yet, but there is a different T sound. There's actually several different T sounds in Hebrew, and this is the very strong T sound. Remember that dot underneath the H made it a strong, explosive H? Well, this is a strong or explosive T sound. Ta! So this is a tet, which has a strong T sound represented with the diacritic, the dot underneath the T for the English transliteration. Tet. So, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet. We have 2 intense letters in a row, and then we have the smallest letter. Remember I said jot and tittle? This is the yod, which is what is represented in that translation, jot. It's a tiny, tiny little mark. Notice that it's on the top of the box, and it's just a little wisp of a letter. This is the sound y, like the Y in yet, y. So this is the beginning of the name Yahweh. This is it's translated in English with a Y, a yod sound. So yod, the tiny letter. Next is kaf. It's another one of those dot letters. I'll just go ahead and tell you that dot is called a dagesh. We're going to get to that later. But this has got one of those dageshes in it. You can see it's written without the dagesh in Kutz and Josberger. That's okay. But this is the letter kaf. It's pronounced like ka. It's kind of like our K. So we're going to transliterate it with the English K. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf. Now, this kaf letter is a funny one. First of all, you can confuse it with beit. To confuse it with the beit, you're going to leave a little kind of a tittle hanging off the lower right-hand side of the beit, and it's also going to be curved on the side, the beit, and flat on the bottom, whereas for the kaf, just kind of leave it kind of more rounded all the way around, and then that we'll be able to tell that's a kaf and not a beit. There's another interesting issue with the kaf, and you'll see in Kutz and Josberger there's a final form. I'll get to the final forms later. For now, just learn that the typical form. Okay, next is lamed. This is an awesome letter, my favorite letter in all of Hebrew, because it goes above the box. The only letter to break the box on the top. It just kind of has a head that kind of croons out there. I think of it as the giraffe of letters there. So you can see it starts tall and on the left, goes straight across horizontally to the right, and then down and kind of angles back to the left for the bottom of the letter. This is lamed, and it is represented with an English L, and it's pronounced L as in like let, la. It's it's for an English speaker, it's a typical L sound. That's lamed. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, lamed. The only letter that occurs above the line that breaks the top line. By the way, if you want to see a cool a scribe here, a scribe is someone who copies ancient texts, right? So the Leningrad Codex, which I showed you the cool star picture, the Star of David image from for the introductory lessons. You can see here this lamed goes way above the line. See that? See those red lines? Those are all lameds that are breaking the top of the line. That scribe he was having a good day. He's just kind of living his best life, making those giant lameds up there. And you can see a few others throughout the text as well. So that's a lamed, the la sound. Next is maim. Maim. This makes a ma sound and is transliterated with English ma. It looks a little bit like a mountain. That's actually how I learned about it at first, with a little bit of like a rock sticking out there. Notice that little promontory, that little rock, that little thing jutting out to the top left, that's a really important part of the letter. Kutz and Josberger show you how to make that little line down and then kind of a triangle around it. I make it a little more rounded, but it's all good. We'll be able to tell them apart as long as they've got that little jut sticking out to the top left, and that they're making a little triangle-ish shape around at the bottom. This also has a final form. Again, we'll get to final form letters later. But just learning this in order, we have Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Maim. Ma. And next is Nun. Pronounced Nun. It makes a na sound. This is another skinny letter, or letter that takes up half the space of a typical letter. It's transliterated with English N, and that's it. It is a final form letter as well, but we'll get to final nun later. But this is it looks a little bit like a vav, but it's got a foot on the bottom. It has a foot that's different from gimel, right? The gimel foot kind of like angles down. The nun foot just sticks out straight. So it looks a little bit like vav, but it's got the straight foot on the bottom. Gimel's got the angled foot on the bottom. Zion's got the beret on top, remember? Huh? Yod is just that little tiny thing sticking up in the air. Those are all the kind of small letters. All right, our next Hebrew letter is Samech. Makes a S sound, a simple S. like sat. Now there are other S sounds. For some reason, Semitic languages have many S sounds, and we'll get to some more of them in a minute, but this is the simple one. It looks a little bit like a circle, and notice that there's this little tittle hanging out in the top left corner, a little bit hanging over the edge there of your circle, and that's what makes a samic. Some people just make circles, but it's a little bit hard to tell if it's a samic or a zero, if it's a circle or an O or whatever. So in any event, try to leave a little bit extra out there as you round around. So Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, samic, and then ayin. Now ayin is the counterpart to Aleph. Aleph is a glottal stop. Glottal meaning your throat. You stop the sound with your throat constricting. Remember, apple. Remember, it looked like an ox. This is ayin, which actually means eye, like the eye on your face. So it's supposed to look a little bit like your kind of eye on your head. It's got a little kind of Egyptian style makeup there on the edge. Kind of turn your head 90 degrees. And you might be able to see like an outline of an eye. But so this is ayin, and it's a deeper glottal stop than the aleph. So the aleph was like air, apple. The ayin is deeper in your throat and stronger, like even more kind of constricted, very strong stop. Now, here's the thing. We don't make a difference. Like English speakers, I don't make a difference between ayin and aleph. And actually, modern Israeli Hebrew speakers don't make much of a difference between them either. In the ancient world, we knew that they made a big difference, and the reason we know that is they never confused the letters. They confuse other letters sometimes, but they hardly ever confuse ayin and aleph, which means that they didn't confuse how they sounded. But that kind of ability to make these sounds is a bit beyond us now. If you are a native Arabic speaker, then you actually do have the possibility of making different glottal stops and more. There's other kinds of Semitic sounds that can be made, like the Gayan, but which is not a Hebrew letter. But there, so our two stops are in Hebrew are aleph and ayin, and they are the strangest to an English speaker, a native English speaker. These are the strangest sounds in the Hebrew language, but you'll get used to them over time. And this is translated with an apostrophe going the other way from the aleph apostrophe. So if the aleph apostrophe is kind of open to the left, this ayin apostrophe curls around and is open to the right. That's the difference for the transliteration. It is important to transliterate them differently because they'd be different words if they had different letters in them. You can't change letters and words and keep them the same, right? So there's ayin. As I said, ayin is nowadays pronounced just like aleph. And like aleph, ayin tends to take on the sound of the vowel that accompanies it. Whatever vowel comes next, that's what you're just kind of stopping and then making the sound of that vowel. Now I know we don't know vowels yet, but we'll get to them. That'll be the next lesson. Okay, so the next letter in the Hebrew aleph bet is pei. Pei. Notice this is also a dot letter or a dagesh letter. We'll get to the dots later, but for now, it looks a little bit like a curly Q. You kind of start in the center and make a spiral that goes out and is open to the left. There's a little opening on the left. Some people notice that this looks a little bit like a curled around backwards P. That is true, and there's a reason for that. It's actually connected to the Latin alphabet. The Greeks kind of stole this alphabet. This is really the Aramaic alphabet, right? The Greek speakers stole the Phoenician alphabet, which this is related to, and then flipped it around and wrote it the other way, left to right, and included vowels and so on. So you might notice some similarities between some of these letters and some Latin or English letters. And that's why they're actually related. So in any event, this is a backwards P, basically. But this is pei, makes the sound pa, and here's the English transliteration P, right? Okay, the next letter is tsade. Tsade. Now I'm saying the T and S together. Tss. Kind of like if you want to make a sound that a snake makes when it's like, kind of slithering at you, right? Tss, tss. When it bares its teeth and puts out its tongue, right? It goes tss, tss. This, an English equivalent is the TS in sets. Sets, or bets, or jets. Tss. So that's an independent letter in Hebrew, and it's tsade. Tss. What's important here is to note that it's a complicated form of the letter here in well, kind of an ornate Hebrew script. But take a look at Kutz Josberger on page 8. It's a lot easier to make. You got a little kind of horn coming out the top right, and then like a 2/3 of a triangle coming out to the left that's open to the left. It's not that hard to make once you practice it a few times. This is also a final form letter, just like pei. There's a final form of it, and like nun and mem and kaf. We'll get to what the final form is later. So just focus on the kind of typical version right now. English transliteration. We don't have a ts like we know. When you transliterate, you want to make one letter per letter, right? You don't want to add extra letters. So when you have ts, you add it in. That's not great for actual transliteration. So you want to represent letter for letter. So here you go. The letter that we use to transliterate sade, the one letter in English would be as s, but it's close to an s, but it's got that s kind of thing. It's kind of like a strong s, like an explosive s. So you add the dot underneath, just like you added a dot underneath for chet and a dot underneath for tet. A strong s, the sade. Next is kof. Kof here, it makes a sound kind of like Q. It's a little bit of a different sound from the kaf. Kaf and kof are easy to mix up when you say the names of them, but they actually look really different, which is good. And they would have sounded different in Hebrew. Kof is a little bit further back in your throat. Kaf is a little further up in your throat. Kaf kind of uses the middle of your mouth. Kof uses some of your throat back there. So kof and kaf. Kind of like caught and key. Those are both kind of k sounds in English. Like, did you have your keys? Did you bring your keys? So if you say that, you realize you're saying it pretty far up in your mouth. And then caught, like I was caught this morning. Caught, that's pretty far back in your mouth. So you might think that key and caught are the same k sound in English, but they're not. They're two different sounds. And here in Hebrew, they've represented the k sound up in your mouth with kaf and the kof sound with kof, right? So in any event, it's hard to make a distinction today with these, especially for people who are English speaking or who are not Semitic speakers. But in any event, so I'm not going to take off points or anything for getting these a little bit mixed up. But just notice that when you have a word written with kof and not kaf, the letters weren't interchangeable in the ancient words. So when you learn your vocabulary, try to remember this is a kof or this is a kaf. All right, so kof, as a Q is in quick, kof. Represented with English Q in transliteration. Okay, next is resh. Resh. You can look at it, looks like a backwards R, because it is a backwards R. It's R. We represent it in English with an R. Just flip it around like in a mirror. And that's resh. Next is, by the way, resh does not have that extra tittle on top. That's why we told you when you learned the dalet. That's why I said, hey, make sure you get that extra little bit on the edge there, because resh is curved and doesn't have that extra tittle. That's the only way to tell these things apart. Your dalet's 90-degree angle and hanging off a little bit to the right. Your resh is curved and there's no extra tittle on top, right? So that's an important thing to remember. Next, we have seen, which is spelled actually like in Hebrew S-I-N, but it's pronounced seen it's not pronounced sin, it's pronounced seen. And it's a softer S sound than we even have in English. So it would have been really different from Samic. Samic is S like our S. Seen would have been kind of like this soft S sound. S is in set, I guess. But today we don't make a distinction between this. Even modern Hebrew speakers don't make a distinction between seen and Samic now. But in the ancient world they did. And you can see that there's an English transliteration to try to represent that this is a different sound than Samic, or at least was in the ancient world, with an S with a little accent, aigu, you'd say in French, a little accent going up to the right, starting low to the left, going up to the right. And that is the English transliteration of Hebrew seen. Notice that seen looks a little bit like a W. The next letter in our alphabet is going to be very similar. Sheen, which I got there, Charlie Sheen, ha ha ha. No, actually not. This is not Charlie Sheen. But in any event, notice that you got the W kind of there, right? And then a dot in the top right-hand corner, right? So seen is the same look. It looks the same, except it's got the dot has shifted. I'm going to go back and forth and just show you here. Seen, see that's the same letter, but the dot is on the top left. And Sheen is on the top right. Now, sheen makes a sh sound. Sh. So, seen makes a s sound, and sheen makes a sh sound, which we represent in English with this S with like a little V on top of it. That's the sh. And it tells you that there's it makes that sh sound. You can have it on top of a Z, and that would make a zh sound. So all to say, it's a diacritic that tells us that it's not a pure S sound. It's sh, like shot. Like I'm not gonna waste my shot. Not throwing away my shot. There you go. So this letter here and seen were originally the same letter, but they were pronounced differently in two different dialects of Hebrew and became really two different letters over time. Kind of amazing. That's why they look so similar and they're so easy to confuse. Seen and sheen. All right, and then tav is last. Pronounced like t in tap. Tav. It is like tet, but in ancient form of this letter, it would have been kind of softer than tet. Today we make no difference with how we pronounce them. No one will care how you say your t sound in Hebrew when you pronounce it in a modern sense. But just know that ancient speakers could tell differences between these different letters. So when you learn vocabulary, sometimes it'll have a t sound in it, and you might be like, is that a tav or a tet? And it actually does matter when you're reading the Bible, because the Bible has these ancient sounds written. But so tav is the t sound, and that's the last letter in the alphabet. So in the Hebrew alphabet, you don't go A to Z. Z's in the middle, right? Zion. You go aleph to tav, right? Tav is the last one. That's the end. That's the end of our consonants. Note with the tav, this is an interesting one to try to draw here. The really important thing about it is that you have a little foot on the bottom left. Do you see that little foot on the bottom left? As Kutz and Josberger have it on page 8 of the grammar, you can see the chet. It's got that little box thing, and it goes straight down. The tav has got that little foot at the bottom on the left. And that's going to be the way to really tell the difference between these two letters, chet and tet, which make two really different sounds. So it's important not to confuse them. So that is a brief and quick run through the Aleph Beit, the 22 consonants, that 23 if you count Sin and Shin as two different consonants, that constitute the Hebrew alphabet. And we are going to, in the next video, talk about important things about the alphabet. We're going to talk about those dots that I mentioned. We're going to talk about those final forms, those 5 letters that have different forms. We're going to talk about some easily confused letters. And we're going to end by showing you a bit, and we're going to move into vowels. Okay, so continue to practice writing and drawing these Hebrew letters and reading them, that is, recognizing them when you see them. I know it's hard, but keep persevering, and please know that God is with you in all that you do. Amen.